So welcome to our speaker series, which is brought to you by our sponsors, Mesirow and Keeper, and you'll learn more about them on the website. We have some friends from Mesirow and from Keeper here. And we're welcoming a really distinguished, I think of him as, as a little bit of everything. And I think it's going to be an exciting opportunity. Harper was involved with the Obama campaign, which you may know the first campaign was really responsible for incorporating a lot of technology into politics. And now it's sort of the way the game is played. So he's going to talk about his journey, and he's done a little bit of everything over many, many years. And then we're going to do Q&A and sort of a fireside chat and just cover whatever you guys are interested. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and you're in control. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. So, do I get my slides? Hello. Okay, it worked. So hi, I'm Harper. Please follow me on Twitter. Howard was like, yo, do you want to speak for the students? And I was like, well, I mean, I'm trying to get more Twitter followers, so yeah, I'll do it. I actually really want to know who paid Howard to call me distinguished. Because I've known Howard for how long? A really long time, and I've never heard him say anyone is distinguished. So I'm actually excited about this moment, this journey. So today I'm actually not going to talk about my journey at all. I'm actually going to talk about AI a little bit, and some of kind of my thoughts around this. So I guess let's get started here. So what is AI? Y'all know what AI is, right? Y'all work in this space a little bit. Good. Well, the thing is I have no idea what it is. I've always been wondering what this is, and what I know, though, is AI is magic. How many here people think AI is magic? Okay, good. We have some yes, it is magic. Well, actually, right, it's just math. It's just machine learning, neural networks, it's just math, right? And the thing about this stuff is it's not new, right? This is pretty old stuff. And we have this kind of interesting change recently where we've had a lot of progress on this stuff. It's getting way better, it's getting, way faster, it's getting way weirder. Here's a picture of myself. If you look at my beard very closely in this picture, what do you see? All right, so this is what happens when you run some of a picture backwards through some image classifiers. You start to get this kind of very strange visualizations. And it's used every day. One of the things that Howard and I are known for is startups. We spend a lot of time in startups. And the thing about AI and machine learning and all that stuff is that it really is a standard tool. We're seeing it in a lot of the best companies, and it is a sure bet when it comes to technology that we would choose. But here's a couple interesting things about machine learning, AI, etc. One of the first things is that AI doesn't learn like humans. I like to think about this, and especially when you think about things like Lee Sedol's Go match against AlphaGo. A lot of the pundits, when they talked about this, talked about how the results of this and the match and the moves that the AlphaGo computer did were unlike any moves they'd ever seen in a Go match previous. They didn't make any sense. And so a lot of people didn't understand what was actually happening. And that leads me to this next one, which is that AI creates alien knowledge. It creates this alien knowledge that we don't understand, and it's not just weird photos like this. It's actually, here's a tweet from Google. In 2016, Google tweeted this: Google doesn't quite understand what RankBrain is doing. So Google has an algorithm called RankBrain, and they don't know what it does. I think this is really interesting. I happen to have a Tesla. It's really fun to drive. On the highway, you make it auto drive, and every time I do that, I like to think that Tesla doesn't know why it works. And I think this is one of the things that we have in this black box world of AI. We have all of these algorithms, all these models, and we don't actually know why it works. We know what went into it, we know what comes out of it, but we don't know what that black box is doing. James Bridle, who's a really interesting philosopher around this stuff, James actually says, machine learning is what we call any software we do not understand. So I love that because it resonates quite a bit. There's this other thing that all these really smart people are really afraid of AI. Like, we have this kind of big deal where people like Bill Gates says, I don't understand why some people are not concerned about AI, machine learning, etc. Elon Musk says, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. Seems dramatic. Stephen Hawking, The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Dramatic once again. So why? Why is that? Why do we have these kind of big-time philosopher type of entrepreneurs, rich people? Why are they saying this? Well, I think it's actually pretty straightforward, and I think y'all probably know a lot about these, like the paperclip maximizer. How many people here know about the paperclip maximizer? Anyone here know about this? Okay, a handful of people. Well, I'll just explain it real quick. So the paperclip maximizer is where we have a paperclip factory. We add an AI to it. It makes it very efficient, and we just forget to give it maybe a couple instructions. And in the process of making paperclips, it harvests all the resources of the world, the universe, etc. Very straightforward, but there's a lot of paperclips. There's actually a really fun game that you can play about paperclip maximizers. The next one is the AI control problem. Does anyone know about this one? This is a really good one as well. How many people here have a Roomba? Okay, a handful of people have a Roomba. Well, this is actually, kind of called the power button problem. And the idea here is that you have a Roomba, it's cleaning your house, it's really great, and you get that email from Roomba or whomever, and it's like, we've upgraded your cleaning robots firmware, it's now fully autonomous. And you're like, great. Next day, your house is clean as hell. It's just the cleanest house anyone has ever seen. Everyone's like, wow, your house is very clean. How'd it get there? Oh, it's this new cleaning robot. It's autonomous. And so you have this cleaning robot, but you're going to go on vacation. You can go visit your family, whatever. You go to the cleaning robot, and you're like, yo, I got to turn you off because I'm going on vacation. And the cleaning robot is, no, you can't turn me off. I got to clean your house. And so you're like, no, I got to turn you off. And you have this argument, and you're like, why am I arguing with my Roomba? What is happening? And so you grab a broom to go hit the power button, and the Roomba slaughters your family and kills everyone so it can continue cleaning your house. That's roughly the power button problem. So the thing about this, these are like some big philosophical ideas. These aren't really these are just big ideas. And there's a lot of philosophers that are thinking about this. There's probably people in this building that are considering these things and how to solve it. But what about today? What does this bring us about today? Well, today's really interesting because I think we have a long way to go. Many of you have probably experienced some of this stuff, but when you Google or when you look into like what is machine learning doing today, you see all sorts of interesting things. For instance, if you go to YouTube and you Google robots falling down, you get a lot of really fun videos to watch of all these robots that are, falling down, and you're just like, wow, this must be really hard, right? And we saw Pepper over there, and I was like, why isn't Pepper roaming around? And they were like, well, she'll fall down. So obviously, we're not super worried about that. But training AI, how many people here have trained models or trained AIs? Handful of people. So we all know that it can go really wrong. So here's some examples, some really fun ones. Here's an agent that pauses the game to avoid losing. So you're just like, make sure you don't lose. And it's like, okay, pause. It didn't lose. Agent kills itself at the end of level 1 to avoid losing in level 2. Creatures bred for speed grow really, really tall and generate high velocities by falling over. So that might be why the robots fall down. Simulated pancake-making robot learned to throw the pancake as high in the air as possible in order to maximize time away from the ground. So these are really fun, and there's all sorts of examples of this. This is a link to a Google Doc where people have, this woman has collected these, put them in this doc. It's actually really fun to read, entertaining. And digital assistants. How many people here have an Alexa or a Google Home? Okay, so here's a fun example. Amazon's Alexa started ordering people doll houses after hearing its name on TV. This is my favorite. Parrot activates Alexa when mimicking owner places online shopping order. So I don't know if this is about parrots or about Alexa, but it's definitely thought-provoking. So obviously we're not quite there yet. We don't have these AIs that are killing our families in order to clean our houses. We don't have these killer robots. None of that stuff is happening right now. But there still is a lot of issues that I think it's important that we think about and really be considerate of. One of the first ones is persuasion. How many people here use Facebook? Okay. Is there really half the room doesn't use Facebook, or are y'all not raising your hands? Just give like any kind of indication, because I don't believe that y'all don't use Facebook. What about WhatsApp? Instagram? Y'all heard of Instagram? Anyway, one of the things about this is that we've seen a lot of conversations around persuasion. In my previous job, where I was the CTO of the Obama campaign, we used to think that persuasion via the internet was not real. We were like, oh no, this is not about persuasion. We're not going to persuade people. We saw, especially starting before the 2016 elections, that people were actually being persuaded via online interactions. And it's definitely gone up. We've seen this more and more. And it's not just politics, it's also advertising, it's also your interactions with these mobile apps. There's been a huge difference between 2012 and 2016. And the way I kind of like to think about this, when you're building these situations, you're building these data-driven experiences, you have to think about these three things: permission, transparency, and attribution. How do you make sure your users or whoever you're building this for, they know that, or they're giving you permission? How do you make sure that they know and that you're transparent about how you're using this data? And then how do you make sure that the attribution that you did this, that they see that? And that's really important. We'll start to see that more in a lot of our politics, I think. Tristan Harris is a really big philosopher around these ideas. You can follow him on Twitter as well. But one of the things that he talks about is how technology hijacks people's minds. The reason I asked about Instagram, Facebook, etc. is because I love Instagram, but every time I get a like, I'm like, oh yeah, a like, and it tickles my brain. And I get really excited about this experience, this feedback loop of me getting a like. I post content, I get feedback. I post content, I get feedback. But the interesting thing about this is the adversary against me in this relationship is a bunch of modeling that powers an ad exchange. So their job is to make me click more, and my job is just to live my life. I'm not going to survive this interaction. They're going to beat me. There's another person that talks a lot about this stuff that I think is probably the most important thinker kind of in these big picture stuff around social media, Renee DiResta. Renee talks a lot about recommendation engines. We all see recommendations engines every day. We see this with Amazon. We see this, etc. But one of the things that she talks about is how recommendation engines directly lead to radicalization. And so one of the examples she uses is she takes an empty Facebook profile. She starts to join some new mother groups. And from those new mother groups, she gets recommended a new group, a new group, a new group, and so forth. And we've seen that. You join a group, you're excited about it. You're like, yeah, I live in Chicago. I'm going to join the Chicago group. And they recommend you a group for your neighborhood, etc. Well, with this empty profile where she has no data in there, no signals telling Facebook what groups should be recommended, after 12 or so of these recommendations, she's in a group that celebrates flat earthers. And so it's this idea that Facebook's recommendation engines themselves, that algorithm that powers the recommendation program there, actually accidentally leads to radicalization. This is not on purpose, but it is a problem that we need to solve and be thoughtful about. There's this other thing that's happening, which we talk a lot about. I'm sure you've talked about this here, is bias, especially bias within our training. I think this is really important. Kate Crawford, a really good philosopher around AI and whatnot, calls this the white guy problem. And I think it's really important when you have Silicon Valley companies that look more like me than y'all, that there's a big problem that we need to address. Here's a headline on what can go wrong. So self-driving cars are more likely to drive into black people. What does that mean? Why is that? That's obviously because the people building those algorithms don't necessarily either know black people, hang out with black people, have black people on their teams, etc. And so we have to figure out how to solve this. Well, I have another example of this that I think is a little less brick to the face, but there was a great startup here in Chicago, this amazing Chinese startup that did image recognition. They were in Techstars. They were really, really smart. Eventually got sold to Amazon. But I was helping them out, and they were showing me this app they built. And it was this really funny app. And what it did is you took a selfie, and it told you your age. So they demonstrated. They each took a selfie. It was like 24, 30, 32. It was amazing. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And they're like, you try it. I take a selfie, and it's like 300 years old. And I'm just like, what? What's going on? I'm not 300. Like, oh, it's obviously your beard, your glasses, probably something. So Clint, like my co-founder of my last company, Clint, why don't you try it? Clint, no beard, no glasses. He tries it, 140 years old. And they're like, well, it's a little better. And Clint's like, no, it's not a little better. And so there's this thing of like, they realized at that point in time that they had not tried it on anyone who wasn't Chinese. Their entire network was Chinese. They tried it only on their Chinese friends. That was it. And so this is the thing. It doesn't matter what you're building. It does matter what your network is, what they look like, who they are. And we're oftentimes building for an audience that looks more like this, not just like this. And it's important to remember that. Training AI, I think, is really rife with this stuff. I'm going to read this one real quick. In an artificial life simulation where survival required energy but giving birth had no energy costs, one species evolved a sedentary lifestyle that consisted mostly of mating in order to produce new children which could be eaten. So this is the thing. You're not giving the right clauses, the right information to these models, and you can create really terrible things on accident. That wasn't the intended idea. They weren't like, how do we create this horrible world? They just tried to give it some signals, and then the reaction wasn't necessarily positive. And I really think this is a lot like Aladdin. How many people here remember the stories from when we were kids about genies? They're like, you have 3 wishes. What is your first wish? And in the story, they always wish for something crazy. Like, I would be like, I need solid gold pants. And then they'd be like, and now you can't walk, right? But that's the thing, is like, when we're working with these technologies, it really is, slide. It really is because AI does exactly what we tell it. Exactly. And I think that means the problem is with us, the we in that sentence. There's a wonderful woman named Joy. Joy's this incredible, incredible person at MIT Media Lab. She does this thing called the Algorithmic Justice League. And I think this is one of the most important groups right now around these technologies, around these topics. And the reason is because Joy is a computer science person, was doing programming and doing some exercises around facial recognition. And they weren't working. And she was finding this experience of not being able to figure out why this isn't working. She's debugging it, it's not working. She's debugging it, it's not working. I mean, we've all been in that situation before when you're programming computers. Except she's about to go to a party. She puts on her party mask, and instantly the examples work. And she's like, WTF, why do they work with this mask? They won't work with me. She takes off the mask, they don't work. She puts on the mask, they do work. Now, if you look at this mask is not a real mask. She's a real person, but the mask is fake. The facial recognition algorithms that she was using, which were publicly available, did not recognize a black woman, but recognized a caricature of a white face. And so this is what happens when you're not careful about your algorithms, which is why the Algorithmic Justice League is actually really important. She goes through and audits all of the big companies' facial recognition algorithms, making sure that they're equal across every type of person. And there's a lot there. I definitely recommend checking them out. So what about displacement? There's a lot of talk about displacement. I think de-skilling is the bigger issue. Just with truck driving alone, there's about 4 million people that are going to be displaced in the next 10 years. A lot of you are in school. I think this is actually a really big topic. Kai-Fu Lee, who's one of, I think, the biggest kind of pundits around this stuff, he suggests that 40% of all jobs could be displaced within 10 years. Is it 10 years? 15 years. I guess you have an extra 5 years. So I think this is tricky. And no industry is safe. Actually, is anyone here safe? Is anyone here not going to be automated? No? There's always one person who's like, no, I'm fine. And I'm always like, what do you do? So what do we do? What do we do about this? This is kind of a complicated thing. Has anyone seen this movie? I've never seen this movie. I have no idea what it's about. Apparently ABC is a big part of it, right? Always be conscientious. Always be thoughtful of the people. Always be thinking about the people. Oftentimes when we have a database, in that database you're going to have rows. In those rows, every one of those rows is typically a person somehow. There's a person there. And I think the best way to do this is actually be very thoughtful about your users. Invest in user experience. Constantly thinking about those users. But the other thing here is, how do you invest in ethics? That's something that's really important, especially for your people who are still in school. How do you make sure that ethics is part of your everyday conversation with technology? But there's a couple final things here. The first one is Gary Kasparov, who talks a lot about this. He was one of the first people to be beat by some big kind of AI chess computer. And he was really trounced. But one of the things about this, when he talks about his experiences, especially when it comes to Lee Sedol, he says, well, actually, when you take the chess masters and you pair them with the chess computers, they're unbeatable. They beat all the rest of the chess computers. They beat all the rest of the chess masters. And so I think there is this thing where when we pair people with good machine learning, good modeling, good AI, that we actually can get ahead together. And so hopefully we don't have those killer cleaning robots. But there's this other thing that I think is really interesting. Lee Sedol went through this experience where he just got completely beat by AlphaGo. Since that, he hasn't lost. So he's basically been successful since that, even against other computers. And so he has learned, and I do think that when we pair these humans and AIs together is when we can be the best. So I do have hope, even though it's kind of dark. Well, thank you for listening to me, and follow me on Twitter. No? Oh, there you go.
I'm live. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Scary.
This is just what I think about every day. I'm in the Uber drive, and I'm just like, man, we are all fucked. That's pretty much every every
All
time.
right, I think Alan may have left just in time for that. Thank you. So let's talk about sort of what I call augmented intelligence, which is the combination of people and machines in ways that should eliminate the redundant, the low-level jobs. And my feeling is that people don't understand how quickly the bar is rising in terms of what we would call in the old days a low-level job. So talk about that.
Well, how many of you have taken an Uber? Okay, good. I like how more people have taken an Uber that apparently have used Facebook. But there's this thing that I always do when I talk to Uber drivers, because I don't really have a traditional job, and so I take Ubers a lot in the time between 9 and 5. So the people that are driving your Ubers also probably don't have a traditional job. And when you talk to them, you can just tell that they have lost their job. Like whatever their career was, they've lost. And in many cases, it's through technology automation, but not stuff that it's not like they have an AI that drives a truck and they're no longer a truck driver. It's like, yeah, things just got cheaper to do. And so they no longer have that career that they thought they were going to have. And I think this is something, especially for the young people in the audience, you should be very thoughtful about. Making sure that you're ahead of that curve, at least by enough to get some savings. But it is this tricky thing of like, when you talk to these folks, they're just like us. They just happen to choose a career that is slightly different. Accounting, what are some other examples? I mean, there's so many of these examples that are lightly automated.
Well, if you look at smart contracts, for example, they're eliminating hundreds of thousands of hours of people pretending that in an 800-page document that only has 3 changes that you have to read all 800 pages, right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting how, an example like that is like, what does the data room of the future look like? One thing I like to look at is the anachronistic languages and iconography and semiotics that are part of our environment, like the floppy disk. But in a big, if you have a big contract, you might have a data room. And a data room used to be a giant room with all this data in that you'd like sign in and go into, and you'd look at the data, this huge room. Now it's like a box account. And in the future, what is it going to be? It's probably just going to be the diffs. It's just going to be, oh, here's all the changes. That's all you get is this kind of...
Well, that's the whole, one of the most, I think, central efficiencies of blockchain and of management by exception.
I thought it was buying drugs.
No, it's really management by exception. It's that you don't have to be concerned with the lion's share of the stuff that is redundant and repetitive. You just have to focus on what change represents in terms of the situation.
Do you have any Bitcoins?
I used to.
Did you?
Yeah.
I guess you wrote a column about losing your...
I did.
You find it?
I didn't know. I got it back.
Then you sold it?
Well, what happened is I was 3 phones later on, and the authentication was in that phone that was long gone. And so I had to... Now, this is a great story. The way you re-authenticate yourself for Bitcoin is you send them a fax of your passport.
Well, that's, for Coinbase. Were you on Coinbase?
Yeah. For Coinbase. Right. That's the best system that was available at the time.
I think it's always funny when you're on stage to ask them if they hold Bitcoin, because if they hold a lot of Bitcoin, then y'all are going to rob him. Right? I mean, that's the thing, right? You're going to be like, Howard Tullman has 800 Bitcoins. The next thing you know, Howard's in a ditch somewhere.
What can I say?
Be careful.
That risk I've avoided.
I have no Bitcoins.
I don't know what to say. About that. So talk about transportation. Where do you see transportation go? You talked about the truck drivers. By the way, I'm assuming that the diamond lanes that used to be for commuters or people with, blow up human beings that they put next to them in their cars are now going to be truck highways.
You totally had one of those. Of course he did. You could see Howard saving the 10 minutes on his commute by blowing up that doll before. It took 15 minutes to blow up the doll.
It had a battery operated pump.
Okay.
I'd like to just say.
So I actually think this is a really interesting kind of topic, and I think there's this other thing that happens. And I really spend a lot of time in Ubers, apparently. But if you talk to your Uber drivers as well, one thing to talk to them about is like how many people are talking. How many people talk to the Uber drivers? Because the people that aren't talking, okay, y'all talk. So the people who don't talk to the Uber drivers, you're in a self-driving car, right?
Wait, I just wrote this column like 3 weeks ago. Have you been reading my columns again?
No.
That would be really, all right, that would be really depressing.
But I think this is the thing.
The person becomes part of the dispatch system, which is part of the car.
And it becomes this thing where they could just have this like completely walled off thing where you just get in a container and it whisks itself away, and you would never know that there's a person driving this.
And that's the vision. I mean, that's the Uber vision.
And that scares me for a couple reasons, because we've already treated those people as non-human. We've already made the decision that they are just part of the car. They're a machine. And I think what that is that's demonstrative of how quickly we're just going to accept these programs into our lives and not change and it will change our humanity and what is humanity. If you think about all of the content moderators, there's been a lot of articles about content moderation on these big platforms and what a terrible job this is at a very low hourly rate with no therapy or PTSD support. And this is done in the name of our safety. You think about all of the outsourced labor. A friend of mine does, I'm trying to think of what he even does. He just has all these people that are sitting in some, almost like a data center, watching ads and classifying ads for some small amount of money in some foreign country that none of us know the name of. And so it's this thing of like, how many of our day-to-day lives are powered off the backs of all of these people that we're not acknowledging as people, and we're not paying for it. And so it becomes that we've built this world of just these people who barely are living, yet they're powering our Alexas, they're powering our Google Homes, our Google Assistants. They're making sure that the voice recognition works really well. And I think that's something that we just need to be thoughtful about. I don't think there's a way out of it, but I would love for it to be just to be thoughtful about this. And you know, maybe my plea to y'all is just when you're in that situation, you see a human, treat them as a human. You know, that might be it for now, because I don't think we can, like Kai-Fu Lee says, like we're not going to change automation. But in the meantime, it would be nice to, you know, treat them like humans, the automates.
Okay. So let me ask you, was the Chinese, was this Orbeus? Wasn't it Orbeus?
Yeah, it was Orbeus.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're great.
Right, okay. So that was sort of representative of an idea that the processing of AI is getting faster, but it doesn't seem that AI is getting smarter.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to make AI smarter as opposed to simply faster in terms of processing larger data sets?
Well, I think it's actually, I think there's a lot, right? One of the ways to answer that question is about trying to figure out who has the data. Because I do think those silos, those big buckets of data, the puddles of data, that is what leads us to smarter AIs. So that means like Facebook, Google, Snapchat, Salesforce. Like it's a small number of solutions. But as we've seen, some of the newer modeling techniques don't need all that much data. Some of the stuff we've been seeing from OpenAI, et cetera, it doesn't need data to actually be very, very good. And especially because you can simulate it and you can generate, you know, hours of data. Like, did anyone see that demo with the hand, where they had a hand that they had trained for hundreds of years inside of a simulated environment across a whole bunch of computers? They didn't actually have to track all of our hands. They didn't have to have hundreds of years of real people time. They emulated it. And then when they moved that model to a physical hand, it just worked perfectly. I think that's what we're seeing more and more. There's an example of this that you can actually do on your own that we did recently this summer. It's really fun. It's called the donkey car. It's just a little RC car. You have a camera on it, and you train it. But you can also train it in a simulation. And so you can do hundreds of hours of training on this car to make a self-driving radio-controlled car that you don't actually have to drive it yourself. And so I think we're going to see some changes. But to make it smarter, I think it's just about experience. Whether it's experience simulated or whether it's derived from data, I'm not sure.
So where do you see technology headed in terms of, you mentioned the political sphere, but how about just government services? I mean, how do you see, you know, I mean, everybody in tech seems to be focused on the for-pay, profit part of the world, and not much is happening in government.
We live in the United States, which, you know, for better or for worse, I love the United States, but from a government standpoint, we don't have good technology in the U.S. That isn't the case everywhere. I spent a little bit of time in Singapore talking to some of their GovTech folks, and they're asking the same questions that you would ask if you were a startup. Like, they're very far along this kind of spectrum because they look at their customers as their citizens. It's this really interesting thing. They're building the same products that we would build, but they're thinking about their citizens as actually these customers, that the customers have a choice to go somewhere else. And I think that's something that we don't think about in the U.S. We just assume that people are going to stay here. I think that's actually one of the things that happens in Chicago. I have so many friends that have moved to Atlanta recently. And there's this thing of like, why do they do that? Well, because we're not thinking of these citizens of Chicago as customers. We're not giving them the services they expect, whether that's schools, whether that's ease. Like right now, they just changed the ID spec. You know about this? I don't know if y'all have been and seen the lines at the DMV. It's crazy.
This is the real license that you need by 2020.
Yeah, 3 hours. Like, it's crazy. That could be fixed with technology. But we're not thinking of the people who are in line as customers. We're thinking of, well, they're of course going to do this, which there's a lot of businesses that do this as well. And when a business rests on its laurels and assumes that the customer is going to be a customer is when the business fails. You always have to be fighting for that customer. And I think that's one of the things that we see. With that said, there's actually a couple really neat companies, some that have some roots in Chicago, Ad Hoc, which does a lot of big IT and technology for government services. There's one for the Department of Defense that's actually looking for machine learning people and hacker people right now if anyone wants to work for, I guess, killer robots. But there's a lot of really neat stuff happening in the government. But it's hard to treat everyone or to convince the bureaucrats or these people, I mean, even the elected officials, that they should be thinking as their constituents as a customer, that the constituent has choice.
So give us your sort of career guidance in a minute or two, not that your career has been successful in any respect.
Yeah,
but just in terms of...
It depends what you're measuring for. If you're measuring for strange, it's been great. If you're measuring for...
Harry would be also...
If you're measuring for parental understanding, it's been terrible. I think my career guidance is actually pretty straightforward. I think the first thing, how I act no matter what I'm doing is I think, how many people know about the bus number, the idea about in computer science about a bus number, right? This idea that you need to make sure that, like you calculate your bus number. How many people could get hit by a bus before we're totally screwed? That's the bus number, right? So you're like, this project has a bus number of 5. It would take 5 bus-related deaths before we're in bad shape. I think about that all the time. I think about, like, what happens if I walk out of here, this beautiful building, get in an Uber and a bus hits me and I die? When I reflect back in my life, am I excited or am I bummed? And that's pretty much it. And that doesn't mean that it's like, you can be excited about being in, like, getting a job. You could be excited about hanging out with friends. It's just about honestly, it's just YOLO, to be honest. I'm like, wait a minute, there might be a simpler way to describe this. Let's go to Drake. But it is this thing of like, you really do only live once, so how do you live your life that way? So when it comes to careers, though, it's very simple. I want to work with a good team, more so than I want to work on a good idea. I want to be excited when I get up. When I get up in the morning, I want to be stoked to go to work. That means that I want to work with people who are smarter than me so I can learn. Those are some very simple things, and that means that I don't have to be the CEO. I could just be the janitor if the team is good enough. Now, my ego sometimes fucks with me and is like, no, you should be the CEO. But, that's a relationship that I have to deal with my ego. We're talking about this right now. But that's basically it. And when I break it down to those simple facts, then it's a little easier. Because then when you just need to make money because you need to survive, you can be like, well, what can I do to be the happiest? How do I achieve that level of comfort that is also related to my self-being? Now, the other thing you can do is you can also trick yourself. You can do things that are going to be about self-care. So maybe your career isn't quite where you want it, but you're working out a lot, and you're eating well, and you're sleeping well, so you feel good. This guy's laughing. It's true, right? Yeah. I mean, some of the worst points in my entire career, I was able to have very good mental health because I was able to eat right, and I was working out.
Well, and sleeping a lot.
I sleep a hell of a lot. I remember reading about Ralph Nader, and Ralph Nader's like, I sleep 4 hours a night. And I was like, man, could you imagine having all that time? And then I go to bed for 10 hours. I sleep a hell of a lot. It's awesome. It's like time travel, man. You sleep on a plane, whoo.
All right, talk about industries that you think are going to be the most disrupted.
I think there is a lot of opportunity right now on media, specifically media targeting younger Gen Z and below. If you look at the media offering that's out there, it does not match the media diet of our young people in the U.S. and internationally. Twitch is so huge, YouTube is so huge, and yet all we have is this kind of theoretical rock star of, I want to be a YouTuber, or I want to be a streamer. I think the secret is there's a hell of a lot of technology and services that need to support that. I think a simple business would just be, I am a simple financial service company that supports streamers. Because I guarantee if you're making $10, $20, $30,000 a year as a streamer, you're not doing your taxes right. You're going to screw that up. You're going to get hit with the IRS from some stupid bill that could have just been really easy, but we're not thinking about what are the services for this new economy of media, because it is democratized. Another thing I'm thinking a lot about is synthetic bio. I think there's huge opportunities, especially for technologists, to be working within synthetic bio alongside of these great biologists, specifically around whether it's drug discovery, which is very popular. But I actually think what's really much more interesting is how do you replace an industrial byproduct, something that is coming from the bio world, whether it's from a cow or whether it's from ag or whatever, but with a process. So you see a lot of vat-grown leather, you see vat-grown meat, but what about like a vat-grown lubricant? If you think about the innovation of synthetic oil within an engine, like what is that synthetic thing that we can make that's replacing a process? And I don't think we do this to save the animals, although I think that's a nice side effect. I think you do this to make a boatload of money, which is nice. What else? There's huge opportunities in space. I think that satellites are cheap. I love that we're like, satellites are cheap. How much are they? 20 million. But that's like hella cheap compared to $1 billion. And so you can piggyback on other satellites. There's lots you can do with satellites. And I think that's really interesting, although all the things I've just said are somewhat ethically fraught as well, I think, which is our new world. But yeah, I think there's a lot of industries there, but I think
What about healthcare?
Yeah. I think healthcare is big. I worked for a little bit for obviously for Sandbox, which had the Blue Cross Blue Shield Venture Fund, and every time you stubbed your toe, there was a low-hanging fruit that needed solved. There were so many solutions that needed built. There were so many things. But we live in the U.S., so we're all screwed. So yeah, good luck.
Well, was that just a general observation, or is that because
I
they
mean,
have
I think
maternity leave in Norway or whatever?
Well, I think the thing is that once again, when you're in a situation like the U.S. where they're not treating the patients like a customer, they're not acknowledging that a patient has the choice to move, what you're going to see is a lot of businesses that we've seen. You have doc on the boxes every 5 feet because no one can afford to go to a real doctor. So the innovations are around how do you, it's like water, how do you guide yourself out of the medical system into some really screwed up, not very good care system? So yeah, I don't know anything about healthcare other than we're all screwed. Well, I really like Norway, man. If I could afford it, that'd be great. It's expensive there. They got that oil money.
All right. Questions from the audience? Anybody? Yes.
There's a box.
Is it live? The catch live?
This is the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
I'm going to you, Krish.
Wanted to ask?
This eliminates the need to pass the microphone around. You just throw it to the next
Talk
person.
into the box.
Can I begin?
Yeah.
Yeah. My name is Tulsi. I just want to share a thought, actually. I think the time in any activities that we spend, it goes generally into routine and creative activity. And if we mess up with our routine, we end up doing crisis also. The point is the AI is going to take care of all the routine to be done in a lesser and lesser time. We as a society are failing to design adequate number of work opportunities which are actually having 90-80% of creative activities. I don't know if you agree, but what's your thought, and whether it is going to implicate the education as a whole, because the way we are being educated now, which are essentially towards the routine activities.
Yeah.
Actually, we should all be graduating towards only and only largely creative activities.
Yeah.
Your comments, please.
I agree with that. I think creativity, although I do think we can emulate creativity with computers, I don't think that is something that is just with humans. I do think creativity is something that we're going to hold on to for a while. It also is fun. I think there's this aspect as well that when you sit down and you're like, wow, we just did creativity, we feel good. One thing that on education, a few years ago I got to see this speaker, this guy named Sugata Mitra, and one of the things he talked about was how teachers and the model of teachers may be a little bit outdated. That actually self-motivated learning is really powerful and you can get very far. And I see this every day when you talk to anyone that's under 20 and you say, wow, that's crazy, how did you learn that? And they're like, YouTube. They obviously didn't need a teacher, and many people are learning crazy things. In Sugata Mitra's example, he was talking about molecular biology, about how he took some kids in India, put a computer out there with just curriculum for molecular biology, and then he had those kids who were basically slum kids take the same molecular biology class as the top high school in Delhi, and the kids didn't pass, but they got 50% or more. They're slum kids. They had to learn how to read. They had to learn what molecular biology was. Like, it's like, I don't think I could have gotten a 10% on that test. And we're underestimating all these people, but we're expecting that they have to go through a very strict and specific pipeline to get to the end, which I think your point is you don't. And I think in the future it's even more that case. So quit school and let's go learn some weird shit on YouTube, I think.
So
maybe not quite the message that you're hoping for. Sorry, Howard.
I think you ended on ethics. So talking about Uber and semi-autonomous or autonomous vehicles, talk about the dilemma where the car has to decide whether to run into the semi or run up on the sidewalk and run over the woman in the baby carriage. So somebody has to make that decision. Is the machine going to make it? Is the driver supposed to make it since there's no driver?
Is it going to pop up an alert for the passenger? And just be like, what do you want to do? Do you want to die or kill the baby? You're just like,
well, that's the dilemma, isn't it? Because that's a choice that we make.
Well, I think there's this, I think that, I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Stumping Harper, not easy.
Well, no, I just think that any answer I could give would be bullshit because we haven't reached that point. That's not real, and we don't know like what the actual situation will be. Like you said, what if the AI-driven cars only go in this one lane? What if they're just long distance? What if they're like trains? There's a lot of ways to mitigate this besides having to make a decision on whether you kill the baby or yourself. But I do think when I think about ethics, there's a couple things that I think are really important. So I graduated college in 2001, and ethics was not part of the conversation. There was not you should think about how this could be not used poorly. The unintended consequences of technology were not mentioned. And I think this is something that's really, really, really important, the unintended consequences. And there's this aspect of unintended consequences that we don't talk about, which is oftentimes the places where we're seeing or that are most fraught are startups, entrepreneurs, etc. To be an entrepreneur, you have to have so much hope in your dream that I don't think that you are capable of thinking about the unintended consequences. I say this as an entrepreneur, as someone who I built this thing. There's no way I could have imagined it being used poorly because it was my dream. And I see some entrepreneurs in the audience, and I know that's the case. So what that means is that you as the workers have to be that voice. You have to have that vision, and you have to have some sort of compass that tells you whether it's right and wrong, and you have to be able to envision the unintended consequence. I was recently at this conference where I asked a bunch of very smart entrepreneurs to imagine what the future crimes would be. And I said, what kind of future crimes specifically within unintended consequences of technology? And one of them just scared the shit out of me. And it was this one, and I don't think we're that far off from being able to execute on this. How many of you here use dating apps? Okay, so handful of people. So the thing about dating apps is they're pretty much all owned by one company, the Match company. If you were a bad actor in the Match company and you wanted to execute an actual eugenics program against a certain population of the United States, you could just tweak the matching algorithm in the dating apps. And you could say, I no longer want gingers to be able to find a match. And then I use a dating app, and I'm like, I cannot find a match. And everyone else is like, no, it's easy. You make this match. This is the power that we've given these people through conglomerates, through algorithms, etc. They can execute an actual eugenics program with the technology we have today if they are a bad actor. But we're not thinking about this. They're not thinking about this. And I don't think there is a good antibody against it, except for the workers inside who are either implementing these things, seeing these things. So I actually think that whistleblowers are really important. I think voices internally are really important. You see some places like, YouTube, where there was a walkout based on their participation in the Pride Parade in San Francisco. You see places like Google, same as YouTube, but where there was a walkout based on some of their bigger issues around ethics and their Chinese search engines, etc. Whether it's the movement that we recently saw at the Media Lab around fundraising. like the voice of the whistleblower as well as the voice of the people internally, I think is one of the only ways to guide this and to guide ethics, because I don't think that us founders are going to be capable of talking about it.
What about the sort of across the board Google refusal of some of the employees to work on military contracts? I mean, where do you come out on that?
Well, I mean, you don't really sign up to work at the company that says do no evil so you can build or kill a robot. I think that's a pretty simple one. I have friends that work in defense. They literally signed up to build killer robots. I think you just find the people that signed up to build killer robots, and that's it. I think we have a question here.
Yeah. So you talk. Hi, my name is Sharath.
Hi.
And you talked about persuasion, right? So my question is, how do you avoid being persuaded? And since you have these network effects from these social networks and other corporations that you use, like Spotify, and they do all the recommendations and all that, and they like push you to a certain topic, and you just go down a rabbit hole. How do you, at this point of time, how do you enjoy the product and also not be persuaded by them and like enjoy the option? Is there like a switch?
I don't
don't
so.
know how do you.
I think you got to move into like a room with no windows and no internet. Like, I think that's the only way to step outside of the system, which I think is why it's really, really, really hard and complicated. Because, for instance, it is very hard to step outside of Google or outside of Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, I have a Facebook account. I don't use it. I use it in a separate. If I use it, I log into it in a separate profile. I don't share cookies. I make sure the cookies are always deleted. But even then, I know I have a ghost profile with them. I know they're targeting me on their ad targeting because they're very smart. I think it is very, very hard. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I was using Instagram. My friend was like, I want to start a pet clothing company like Supreme called Pupreme. And so he was he wanted to do this. So I was like, I'll do some research for you and find all of the pet, and so I get an ad about some like dog shirt. Who knew that was a thing? So I click on the ad and I copy the URL, put it in a notepad. I do that about 10 times. For 2 weeks, I only got pet ads on Instagram, which made this research really easy because then I just copied all the URLs out. But it also was this system. I was giving into this machine where it's thinking, man, Harper really likes pet clothing. He must have a lot of dogs. And just like this whole thing, like I got to clothe a whole thing of dogs apparently. But I talk about this just to say that I don't think the algorithms are that smart. I think they're getting smarter, but with retargeting, et cetera, it's very hard to step out of it. And you alluded to this problem of, let's say, I've been doing research recently about some of the kind of esoteric live video topics, which means that I get all these very strange recommendations. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, that is great. I will watch that YouTube video. Other times I'm like, I'm trying to order pizza. And so it's very hard to get out of that rut. And I think the option is to be aware so you can make a rational decision about your interactions with that, to be thoughtful about what data you're sharing. I like to call this like your social exhaust, like cutting off all the pieces that you maybe don't want to share. I recommend anyone who has an Instagram account to go private, just because then you're not sharing as much data to third parties. You're just sharing it to Facebook, which is a really big third party. But various things like that, but I mean, I use Gmail, I use WhatsApp. I'm like, I'll never use Facebook, but WhatsApp and Instagram are great.
Okay, one more question, anybody?
One follow-up question last.
Quick.
Go ahead.
Very quick.
So nowadays companies have this option of opting out of ad services and you get a paid version. So what is stopping these companies from implementing another option wherein you could just opt out from their persuasion algorithms and probably
their stock price.
I mean, we are ready to pay a premium for the extra opting out option. And
I mean, I think it's a good idea, but the problem is that, like, if you look at Twitter, for example, Twitter has a very clear problem with harassment that is very clearly related to bots. If you get rid of the bots from that platform, their stock price, which is directly rated to monthly active users, goes down. So they have a clear correlation between their stock price and the harassment that is happening. And in a way, they are pro-harassment because that would mean that they have more users. So we're in a bad situation of the money itself is actually dictating, and the stock price itself are actually dictating a lot of these predatory but very nicely successful business situations. With that said, if you can make the business that works without it, you'll make a lot of money.
All right, one last question over there in pink.
So my name's Nick, and you've been talking a lot about the unintended consequences of AI and how we want it to become better instead of just faster. But do we really want AI to solve the Turing test and have all of the unintended consequences of being emotive just like a human?
I mean, I ask this question a different way. When you talk to someone who has a will and they're a tech person, ask them if they put in the part in their will that says their brain should be frozen. Right? Like, do you believe in a future where everything works out? Or do you believe in a future where everything doesn't work out? And I think the difference is it kind of like, is it like Mad Max? Or is it like, Her or any of these other kind of AI kind of situations where everything's beautiful? And there's I have a lot of hope that everything's going to work out, but I have a lot of skepticism that it won't cause a lot of pain before that. Like, I think we're going to go through a lot. The puberty on a good AI is going to be hell.
Okay, let's give Harper our thanks, and we'll get out of here.
Thank you.